where we fail thee, forgive us where we fail each other. Give us strength and wisdom. In Christ's name we pray, amen. Okay, this is not going to be a formal committee meeting. We're turning this into a public hearing. Our formal committee members or meetings are, they're not public hearings. Only ones who can speak are the individual presenting the bill and those of us on the committee. We send our bills to a subcommittee, and that's where you can have an opportunity to either make a presentation or ask questions or do whatever you want to do. But this is being changed to a public hearing for this particular bill because this is not our normal meeting time. Our normal meeting time is Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. We will. I understand.
That's a loud sign right there.
Yeah, it is. But we meet at Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock right here, and this probably will be one of the bills I'm sure that we'll take up this coming Wednesday. This bill is House Bill 146. It has to do with providing insurance coverage for firefighters. I can assure you that this bill is a very important bill. I'm surprised there are not more firefighters here. I wish the room had been full of firefighters. Like I say, it's very important because they perform a very valuable task. One of the things I want to let the firefighters know that the final version of this bill will do two things. It will address your issues while you are a firefighter, while you're working, and then it will allow you to carry that bill or that protection once you retire. You will not be limited just to while you're serving. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Gravely, let him make the initial presentation. Then he has some other people that have some thoughts on this bill to come up and give a little, some more information. And so I'm going to turn it over to Representative Gravely. You should be on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I would, number one, thank you for the opportunity to present this bill. Oftentimes we joke about simple housekeeping bills. I can assure you this is not one of those bills. This is the only thing simple about this particular initiative is the simple fact that in the state of Georgia and across the nation, we are seeing an alarming increase in firefighters being diagnosed with cancer. Last year, we presented a measure that passed the House overwhelmingly and then passed the Senate unanimously. In doing so, we saw that measure needed some help. It had a lot of questions that accompanied that measure. And I'm very appreciative to GMA, to ACCG, and to those that had some questions, quite frankly, about what the bill would do. I'm also very thankful for the fact that members of GMA, other stakeholders with ACCG, took it upon themselves to meet over the summer about how they could help firefighters, what path we needed to take as a state that would ensure that these men and women who are going into the fire as others are running away would know that, number one, their state, their county, and their cities have their backs. The 146 is a product of that. I'm assuming everyone has a copy of the bill. We went from having a measure that would have been placed into the comp section under a preponderance of the evidence to a measure that is now a recommended insurance policy. And that the nature of that policy is laid out in House Bill 146. To go over the bill, it's not a relatively long bill, but it does state that upon a diagnosis, a firefighter would receive an immediate payout of $25,000. After a 6-month review, the firefighter would then be determined eligible to either return to work or would then be designated as permanently disabled. At that point, at the 6-month mark, a salary protection of a 60-40 breakdown would be implemented for a 3-year time period. At the end of that 3-year time period, the benefit, or 3.5-year time period, the benefit would stop. Now, there are a lot of questions, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Are all cancers going to be covered? What if you have a cancer that does not deem you unable to perform your duties? Are those cancers going to be covered? Is the initial payout going to be covered, but what if the firefighter at the reevaluation can come back to work? Is the opportunity to recover the salary protection at 60-40, is that stopped? What happens after retirement? Those are all questions that we've been talking about over the last 6 weeks. And again, I can't emphasize it enough that the time that GMA and ACCG have put into coming to the table, not only with myself and members of leadership, other members of leadership in the Speaker's office, but with firefighters across the state that have represented not only the Firefighters Association, the volunteer firefighters, the union firefighters, the professional firefighters associations. Everyone has had a seat at the table, and quite frankly, I'm appreciative of that. I don't know anyone that does not want to help, or at least find a solution to where we can address this problem. And so, Mr. Chairman, at that point, this is what the bill does. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and I know this is a work in progress. So at that point, I would.
You want to bring your guests from
Yes, sir.
GMA up, so we can talk about a couple of items,
Absolutely, sir. Tom
and Ray.
and Ray. John.
I need Ray up here too.
Okay.
Yeah, Cal Ray.
Chairman,
Okay.
we can squeeze in.
Do you want to double cheek it or?
That'd be single. That'd be single chicken.
Okay.
All right, make this a bench.
We need some more chairs. Introduce your guest there.
Tom Gale with GMA, and John is
John Hanson.
John Hanson, who has worked with us, who is was hired on or contracted on from a private actuarial firm here in Atlanta
Willis Towers Watson.
to help kind of craft. And matter of fact, John has been working with carriers that have been trying to identify a policy that would match these tiered levels of benefit.
Okay. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Tom Gale with the Georgia Municipal Association. And for those of you who remember from last session, House Bill 216 by Representative Gravely passed both the House and Senate and was, in the governor's wisdom, vetoed because of some concerns that we had been expressing throughout the legislative process about providing certain types of benefits for firefighters in a way that doesn't bankrupt or potentially put onerous financial burdens on municipal governments. We decided right after the veto occurred that it was unwise to assume that the governor would always take the position that we had that legislation like this was potentially onerous financially for local governments. We decided instead to start talking about a different platform for covering benefits for firefighters rather than workers' comp. And so we started working with John, trying to come up with some ideas on how to prepare a plan to give firefighters benefits that they see as valuable in a way that doesn't bankrupt the municipality's finances. So that's kind of what led us to this discussion today. We've had numerous discussions with the firefighters directly to talk about what kind of benefits are useful to them. And we've come up with some ideas and minimal benefit levels that we were able to get to Representative Gravely and the firefighters. I need to sort of pause right there and to say thank you to Representative Gravely. He's been very open to all of these discussions. So have the firefighters. After all, they all work for the cities and counties and protect all of us. The firefighters do something that most normal people do the opposite. They run towards danger while most folks run away from it. House Bill 146 is a starting point for discussions on minimal levels of benefits. To a certain degree, some of the payout amounts and the income protection amounts were exactly in line with some of the conversations we were having with the firefighters. Our view, of course, is that the benefits are more manageable through this insurance platform rather than workers' comp. HB 146 is aimed at establishing those minimum insurance benefits for firefighters. But as drafted, it has some flaws that don't really comport with what happens in the marketplace. And so what cities need in order to provide benefits is something that the insurance carriers were actually write policies for. Any state overlay that this committee considers and passes, from our standpoint, it needs to be in a form that gives us the flexibility to go to the marketplace and have insurance carriers want to write policies. We can talk about some of the specifics, and trust me, if there are difficult insurance questions from those of you who are in the industry or others who are very astute in the nuances, John is, Willis Towers Watson is the expert in how these insurance carriers work and how to package these programs to those particular carriers. But be glad to answer any questions, Chairman, if you have any.
Let's let John make his key comments, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, my name is John Hanson. I'm a human capital consultant with Willis Towers Watson. My background is nearly 25 years in the insurance or benefits industry, working both on the carrier side and the consulting side. And specifically, I've worked with carriers that have been in this market, which is disability and supplemental medical, for most of those 25 years. So I do have a strong background in the benefits themselves. I want to make a couple of remarks about the work that's gone into it. It's been a fantastic opportunity for me to sketch out some ideas for the firefighters, and then we met over the last couple months 4 times and took feedback. So if you think about it, I did nothing but provide some blueprints for the firefighters, and then together we figured out what that benefit package would look like. And if you think about it, there are really 3 controlling principles. The first is simplicity. The benefits themselves have to be simple, they have to be easy to understand, they have to be easy to access, and a firefighter shouldn't have to run through the gamut of dealing with insurance companies to get access to that benefit. Second, it needed to be of value, right? We could minimum plans, and I would say that this plan is actually a fairly broad plan, but I would want as that standard, any firefighter I would meet on the street would remark that he or she sees the benefits as of great value for them. And then finally, try to impress upon them this need to balance that perceived value together with cost, right? So we started at a certain level and began to look at 2 benefits in particular that really were, think of it as a bookend to workers' compensation. And again, the conversation originally started from presumptive discussions to let's design a product that has the look and feel of somewhat like workers' comp, which has a medical element to it together with an income protection element, right? So that's really where we started. And then we expanded from that point, right? And we tested, over the course of those 4 meetings, we tested levels within those two benefit platforms, together with limitations, together with an understanding of how the benefits trigger, how long they last, how they pay. Again, over the course of 4 meetings, tremendous feedback, right? I started with an idea that came about from looking at some different examples not at a state level, but at a municipal level. So I spoke to a number of carriers, a few actuaries about pricing and about structure. And what I found in the marketplace are a number of plans that are built specifically for firefighters at the municipal level, but still big municipalities that were able to offer a benefit package that looked somewhat like this, but also in particular would provide a benefit for the volunteer firefighters, right? Traditionally, volunteer firefighters are not covered under group benefits because these folks aren't full-time active employees of the insuring or of the municipality. So this plan in of itself is unique in that it actually provides benefits for the supplemental medical as well as for the income protection for volunteer firefighters. Albeit a little differences here and there, but that's only for the sake of simplicity in paying the claim. So again, we started with this notion of tell me what you understand, tell me if a firefighter would make good sense of this, and then more important, is it of value? Do you see it as a value? Would you endorse it in a group of peers? And I can tell you, Friday was a great meeting. We walked through what we had designed as a team, and we took a consensus. We went around the room and asked folks for feedback, what they saw as a value, if they were satisfied that we had done the right amount of analysis to be certain that we had landed on the right benefit program. But I'll tell you, that is of a Friday of last week. So we're working in lockstep here with the legislation, but right together, right? One point I want to impress upon this group is, to Tom's point, you want to make very certain that the language of the legislation comports to or form fits with the insurance. Because this is the sort of thing, even though the plans, as we've sketched them out as of today, have unique facets, you still want to be able to go to the market if you wanted to every 3 years to be certain you're testing the value of those benefits against the price points. And you'll find, as we begin these discussions, there are aspects of the legislation as it stands today that does need revision, right? It's some of the language, you just want to make absolutely certain that it fits with essentially where we are today. It doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to end on the benefits package, but I think we've done a decent job of moving to a benefits platform that form fits with the firefighters as representatives of their colleagues.
One comment, and I think that everyone needs to understand that if we had gone through the workers' comp mechanism, it would have been much more expensive than going through the insurance plan. And with the insurance plan, like I said, I want to ensure that when they do retire, they can take it with them. So that is important. Let's see, number 15. Identify who you are and then.
Yes.
Rich Golick from Smyrna. A quick question for the gentleman from Willis Towers Watson. Mr. Chairman, this may not be on, maybe better.
Okay, it should be.
I think, all right, thank you. My question goes to the market, and I think most, if not all of us, start from the default setting of we want to help, we want there to be a benefit. But of course, as Tom alluded to, if the product is not on the market, it doesn't matter what's on this piece of paper because companies aren't going to go ahead and offer the package, offer the product. What I think I heard from your comments is that generally there are products out there and there are market players out there that are playing in this space, and that there is potentially a product out there depending upon what they're going to see in terms of claim volume over the course of X amount of time. Those costs, obviously, that comes down, a lot of it comes down to the size of the municipality and the workforce that we're talking about. Is it City of Atlanta versus a much smaller city in a rural area? So understanding those dynamics, is the market really, and without getting into specific companies, because I know you can't, does the market exist? And then the second, slightly more granular question is, on something like in line 25, the lump sum benefit of the $25,000 upon the on the initial diagnosis, is that industry standard? Is that something that is ordinary custom and practice for this type of coverage from what you've seen in either this market or in other markets? Is that a realistic expectation for us? Because, again, I want to make sure that what we do here is actually going to benefit the firefighters, that's actually going to have a product in the market that can be purchased, and so they can benefit by it, or else all this time and energy will have gone for naught.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And, you're right. I want to avoid the hollow promise, too. So a few things. One, the two products that we're considering are fairly, the market is very broad for both products. And in the conversations, I spoke to some carriers that offer one but not the other product. And then I spoke to a number of carriers that offer both products. And then, just to be certain, I spoke to very prominent carriers with a very prominent brand, believing that that would be important as well, to have that same sort of partnership at a national level. So as considered, the market is provided that the language within the legislation fits to the product. It is not a dramatic burden to market the same benefit to any number of insurance carriers. And if I were to put a number on the number of insurance carriers that either do one or the other or both, it's upwards of 20 carriers. And which includes carriers that are not only in the ancillary markets, which are the non-medical markets, but you even have medical carriers that could do this same sort of work. So the other piece of it is, so it's one thing to find the carrier, find the product, find the pricing. The other piece of it is the service, right? Because you have plenty of carriers that would be able to do those first few pieces, but would have poor service. So remember that simplicity issue. So you want a carrier, the carrier chosen would be the carrier that not only hits these points correctly, but also has a service structure that would fit, because it's unique. There are some ideas I'll talk about it later if you want, about in terms of how the claims management would work. But in particular, we want a very strong partner on the claims side. I don't want to hear about confusion over whether people were eligible for claims and bills not being paid, that sort of thing.
The lump sum piece?
Oh, lump sum piece is, the standardly 20,000 is what you see a lot of times, so 25 isn't that far off it. Usually you rarely see amounts purchased over 30. What's unique about that plan is that's a lump sum plan. It's built on a specific chassis that normally pays for a number of benefits, but per the firefighter's direction, I narrowed it just to cancer, right? So that pays just for cancer, for severe cancer, and then for less severe cancer. So it has two types of payouts. That's a common product, and 25,000 is very common in the marketplace.
But if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, Chairman Golick, the carriers that John has been getting quotes back from have different payout amounts for different severity levels of cancer. So that, for instance, if you've got skin cancer or a minor small tumor that needs to be cut out, but it doesn't result in any kind of loss of work or designation, as it would relate to House Bill 146, designation of you being deemed to be permanently disabled. What the carriers are quoting is a smaller payout for cancers that are going to cost you money and cost you some sort of procedure, but don't knock you out of work. The way House Bill 146 is drafted, you could get that skin cancer, and if you are deemed unable to work, then you get paid that $25,000 lump sum. And I think the intention, at least in our conversations with the firefighters, is they want to do everything they can to stay on the job and not have to be declared permanently disabled in order to access a benefit, particularly if it's not a cancer that requires radiation or chemotherapy or something that actually does knock them out of the job. So that's a distinction, a smaller payout for smaller metastasized cancers of that nature. So that's,
And that structure, by the way, is that's the common way those cancer plans are quoted.
And those premiums would fall into line accordingly, correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Number one, identify yourself and
Steve Tarvin, District 2. Very quickly, I got about 3 questions. I'm going to be as quick as I can. GMA, remind us who all's a member of GMA?
it's 521, 522 of the
Cities and counties? And
Just the cities.
just the cities. Okay, so are all cities with a fire department a member of the GMA? Or do you know that?
Probably not,
Okay.
but I'm not, I'd have to check.
Okay. And the GMA has decided, as the chairman said, and the experts think that it's cheaper on the cities than workers' comp.
We feel like we can manage the risk and manage the financial liability better through insurance.
And I definitely love fire department. I used to be one of them, but I'm gonna go ahead. You've answered it. I'm sorry, but I'm before I get what I'm saying, I'd have to know. And again, I love the fire department and I support them, and they got a dangerous job. I'd have to know what types of lung cancer we're talking about. Who will decide and when if it was caused by their firefighting, and are we going to tell? We're going to tell cities and counties that you got to insure your firefighters. My next question: what about prison fire departments? Will they be covered also? The prison fire department, we got several, and we got one in our county. So, will the prison firefighters be covered? And we are going to tell cities and counties and anybody with a fire department they've got to carry this insurance. And who will decide at what time and who's going to say this type of cancer, that type of cancer, and when? I guess at diagnosis.
Let me answer the cancer question.
Yes.
The products is quoted. The supplemental medical product does not have an occupational trigger to it. So the firefighter does not have to prove that it is a result of his or her occupation. It is only the diagnosis of the cancer. In terms of the private firefighters, we've discussed that in a couple of the meetings. We have a couple of ideas around it, but it still needs a little more time to figure out how to draw non-ACCG, non-GMA entities within the same program.
Okay. So, any firefighter that has any type of cancer, this is really just a cancer policy, and it might not be related to their work.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be related to their work. It's a cancer policy. Thank you. And again, we're going to tell counties and cities and prisons they've got to carry this. That's correct if we pass this bill.
That's what they as the alternative, as you'll note from last year in House Bill 216, that would have been, you would have added cancer as an eligible occupational disease to the comp code. Currently, it's viewed as an ordinary disease of life. So a firefighter was unable to bring a cancer claim. The difference between what you're asking is, this is upon diagnosis. Last year's bill, the burden of proof was still upon the firefighter to prove that it was work-related.
okay. Number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Darlene Taylor, District 173, and I really appreciate your bringing this. It's an important issue, and you've made it very simple, but it's almost too simple. I have some concerns about the availability of policies. There isn't one right now like this on a price, so we would know what the costs are going to be and how it would be available to others. It's almost like a private citizen, only these are going to be sent directly to firemen or for cities or counties or prisons or whoever has firemen. DNR has firemen who is going to be able to purchase this to do a protection for which is really work-related. We're covering them for something that may not be work-related, but the intent is really to give them a protection that they should have under workers' comp. And this really will not preclude them from filing something under workers' comp. If they have proof that they can say this is from a workers' comp, I get it, there's been a lot of denials, but there are some instances where you can prove that the cancer was caused by the breathing in of certain materials. And I get that, that's a legal matter. But at this time, it doesn't specifically say which diagnoses, because a cancer policy doesn't care what kind of cancer. But we're asking the cities and counties to pay for this product that isn't available, and we're putting it in law that they have to provide it. So I have some concerns about it. I know, are we getting the cart before the horse? I know there's a need out there, so that's may not be a good analogy, but there's some things that are not fitting into place yet. And are we too far ahead? And again, I worry that liability, where the liability is on these things, and again, currently not there. And if you rate this with the $25,000 for every incident, and we look at the numbers of firemen that have it, what's going to happen when the cost goes up in 2 years or 5 years? We've got it in law, the city and the county has to provide it, but we're making them pay for something that they may not be able to afford. It's just a concern that's out there.
And Representative Taylor, we share your concern. I think the intent of all of us throughout the summer and fall is to figure out a way to manage this cost to provide these benefits. And maybe as a clarification to Representative Tarver's point, the workers' comp platform that landed in House Bill 216 that landed on the governor's desk was financially onerous. I mean, it would have made cities across the state have some really difficult business decisions about things like, do we keep the fire department up and running, or do we try to get the county to do it for us? Those kind of tough decisions. So our intention is trying to figure out a platform that gives the firefighters benefits for cancers, but does it in a way that we can manage it financially. And as you mentioned, workers' comp, that's something that ultimately may still be on the table. But again, the goal is to figure out a way to do it that doesn't break the bank, so to speak.
Do we have any kind of numbers that we could look at one of these policies, what they would cost? If you were just to go to the market today and buy a supplemental cancer policy that had this type of benefit, and it wasn't specifically for firemen, I just feel like it's going to be very high rated because the participants have a known need for it. So you're going to have a high cost. So are you going to take a policy that's out there and available to everybody to buy? Or is it going to be one geared only and sold only to firemen?
And how we were looking at it in our conversations with the fire profession, with the carriers in order to cover the firefighters, was creating something that's unique for the firefighters based on some of the models that John has found in other municipalities, big cities across the country. And so it is sort of a specialized plan.
Could you share some of those with us, even if it's a blind, not knowing who they are, just so we could have a feel for what the costs would be on a monthly PEPM, so we would know what cities could expect or counties could expect to pay? It's probably a little early in the game for that, but I'm worried about passing a law when I don't know what I'm committing to.
And it is a little early. We're still finalizing at least the discussion, right, in terms of, and I recognize you're absolutely right, there are carts that are sitting before horses these days, but what does change, you made the point, it does alter pricing when you're covering 30,000 plus firefighters, right? It alters it to a lesser extent on the supplemental medical product, but it alters it a great deal when you're covering just firefighters for disability, right? And that product is not just occupational disability. That is because that's what workers' comp covers. This covers non-occupational as well as occupational disability. So I should have from two, and let's call them top tier carriers, their actuaries are finalizing rates for me this week. So I will have something to share at least as a snapshot of what that market looks like. In the marketplace, you found a lot of folks that were very expensive in the initial conversations. You found some others who who took the time to look at it, and then you had others finally who had experience in these markets. So their actuarial estimations, from my experience, are probably more valuable than others that either just sell it as voluntary products, and in this point, the cities are paying for it as opposed to the firefighters, or other instances where they just don't do large cases like this, and they don't have frankly have the infrastructure or capacity to manage it on a service platform.
Right.
But that should be, in a few days or so, I'll have what I feel are two very valid price points.
Thank you. And this is really needed. I'm glad you're looking at alternatives to be able to do it. But again, I just have some concerns until we have a little more information. Thank you.
Understood.
Okay, number 11.
I'll wait.
Okay. 19.
Thank y'all for addressing this. I had a good friend who was fire chief in Gainesville, died last week of esophageal cancer, and he was a longtime friend and patient. I know CDC's done some research on this, and I've seen some of those numbers. And part of that study was on Chicago and Philadelphia firemen. The increased number of cancers that they did confirm, but they never could really confirm the relationship. And so I applaud the way you're approaching this, because I think this is about the only way you'll be able to do it. I know in the bill, and we all have concern about relating the cancer to the job. That's going to be a hard bar to jump over. But the way you're approaching this is reasonable to help protect our firemen. So I just want to say thank you. Appreciate
Thank you, sir.
Okay, 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Gravely, for bringing this bill. My concern is the fact that we're putting specific numbers in legislation, and what happens if we pass this legislation? What happens 10 years from now or 15 years from now when these numbers are no longer sufficient? And my other concern is that we're treating all cities, regardless of their size, we're putting on the same requirement of them. And I'm a little bit concerned about whether a city of 500 people can afford the same thing as the city of Atlanta, for example, because cities range in size so vastly in our state. So can you speak to those concerns at all?
Well, it's a good question, which is why the original intent was to go into the comp code, where there's a defined structure of benefits. There's a defined term of benefits. If the diagnosis is proven to be work-related. As to the insurance portion of how this is going to be paid for, how this is going to be implemented, I would defer to my friends who brought the proposal to me.
And Madam Whip, I think you're right. We've got a lot of communities that surprisingly rely on with industry, et cetera, that rely on all volunteer fire departments. The capacity for them to raise revenue is limited. I received an email this morning from the city of Vienna. You could raise the millage rate by 1 mil, and it only generates $50,000 for that city. You do the same in Columbus, and I'm guessing it's over $5 million or so. So the capacities are different, but we do have concerns on how you can make this overlay work. We've looked at different things, such as Representative Hawkins suggested. Do we limit it to certain cancers that correlations may exist, or do we limit it to different elimination periods? Like the legislation contemplates you've had to have been on a volunteer fire or on a fire department's rolls for 12 consecutive months. Do we change that around? Do you say for volunteers you have to have been with the fire department for 10 years and full-time active 2 years? Or there's ways to kind of move the numbers of costs backwards and forwards, but it's going to be a concern for a lot of those who struggle now to even provide basic fire service.
I have one other question.
Okay,
Mr.
go
Chairman. And my other question is the whole notion that is there some state that already does this? I mean, who are we following? Where is this coming from?
Yes, ma'am. There are 38 other states that have recognized firefighter cancer. As most recently, as of December 7th, the state of Ohio, Governor Kasich signed in a cancer compensation bill for their firefighters. So the model came 2 years ago when we dropped the bill, was based on the legislation that other states were passing at a presumptive level. And those had very specific triggers. The firefighter had to be employed at 5 years or up to 10 years. It was very narrow in their cancer. All of them, however, went into the comp code at a presumptive level. What we did was we brought that presumption down to a preponderance, which made that burden a little bit more balanced between the firefighter and the city and the counties. But 38, to answer your question specifically, 38 other states have implemented some type of legislation recognizing the correlation between firefighters and their job duties and the diagnosis of cancer.
25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Gravely, for bringing the measure as well. I want to make sure I understand a couple of things here. One, this is primarily a disability insurance package, which is on top of what I would presume to be medical coverage, medical insurance coverage. As a general rule, are firefighters at the local level typically covered with some kind of medical insurance to deal with the medical aspect of cancer treatment, or is that also something we're contemplating?
That's a very good question. The firefighters right now normally either would have insurance through the municipality or the county that they're working for. Some may have insurance through a spouse who works in the private sector. There is a short-term disability, but it would be the basic policy that's offered to every employee of ACCG or GMA, determining the level of that policy, just as you may have a gold, silver, or platinum policy. Those policies are going to cover an array of different things. Some may not cover major medical. The concern the firefighters had originally, and still today, is the fact that when they're diagnosed with cancer, depending on the type of cancer, they were having to utilize sick leave, they were utilizing short-term disability. At some point within the standard operating procedure of the municipality or the county, the firefighter was deemed unfit for duty. At that point, they could be technically separated from their job, when they would lose all insurance. And now if you've got a cancer diagnosis, that's horrific to think of initially, but then to think of the financial impact now that you no longer have a job and that you no longer have insurance to cover you, well, that then becomes an issue that the entire family is worrying about. And so what they wanted was some type of system, some type of benefit that the diagnosis could be addressed if the firefighter was able to prove that the diagnosis was due to the performance of his or her duties.
Okay. I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. What was the rationale you switched from looking at cancers that were primarily caused from workplace hazard to moving it towards all cancers? What was the rationale? How did you get to that point? What was that part of the decision-making process to have this deal with all cancer instead of the workplace hazard that we dealt with last year?
Are you talking about the defined specific set of cancers,
right,
as opposed to cancer in general?
Mm-hmm.
I would defer. I have been in those conversations. It would be okay with defining a set term. As a matter of fact, there is a National Firefighter Registry that has been created that specifically addresses the most common forms of cancer that are related to firefighters, but I'll let them talk about that as well.
Just for clarification, House Bill 216 last year just said cancer as well.
Okay.
It didn't specifically delineate any kinds of cancers, and that was one of the concerns that Governor Deal mentioned as a part of his rationale for vetoing the legislation. We've had those discussions with the firefighters. I think that it is reasonable that there are some types of cancers that may have correlations to their performance of their job duties, but there are others that may not fit in that category. And so we're open to any kind of discussion about that. When John was working with the carriers, for the carriers' standpoint, it's one of the things that keeps the cost low is simplicity of administration.
Okay.
And so if you have specific, you have to jump through these different tests depending on which cancer you've got. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the simplicity of administration was why we just had cancer as the benchmark rather than these 17 cancers or these 3 cancers plus.
And I wasn't objecting. I was just more curious than anything else.
No, and another way to look at it in terms of it really is it's a transition point from the presumptive approach to the benefits approach, right? So the benefits approach is managed. Think of it in terms of tiers of severity. So think of the first tier where you may see a physician to have a mole removed, something like that, which is non-life threatening, it's not metastasized. And then certain types of very small tumors fall in that category. The second tier of severity is that severity which is identified cancer, but it's a cancer that is not life-threatening. You're not receiving chemotherapy, but you are receiving treatment. And then finally, that third tier, which is that full payout, that is full severity. Now think back to our original point about simplicity. As I was thinking about it and testing ideas with the firefighters, it occurred to me that there potentially is confusion if we're covering certain types of cancer at the third tier. So I thought it would be important that in that third tier we weren't designating a list of 5 to 7 cancers and covering only those. We were covering any cancer that was life-threatening.
Okay. And last question, at section 2 here, lines 57 through 60, I'm assuming that deals with whether or not this is taxable income, and considering I don't see the text that goes before or after this, it seems like it's a run-on sentence to me. So I know that there's more in the code here that I'm not seeing. Can you speak to what that says?
Yeah, you want to get that because
Sure.
Sounds
So the benefits. So let's say a firefighter is declared permanently disabled, starts receiving the income replacement. That income replacement is treated like income and is taxed. That would add to the list of exemptions to state income tax. That 60% would not be taxed at the state level.
Okay. Thank you.
25.
County, am I on, Mr.?
Yes, you're on.
All right, Mr. Chairman. Bruce Williamson, Walton County, and I too thank you for bringing this, what I think is a great compromise bill heading in the right direction. So isn't it true that one reason it's going to be more simple is that it's an indemnity product. Contractually, you pay a premium, certain event happens, and boom, the money comes, as opposed to the workers' comp system where when there is a discussion whether or not it is in fact an on-the-job related injury, in this case illness, that sometimes it takes an extraordinarily long time to figure out whether or not benefits are going to be paid. Isn't that true? So,
The gentleman knows of which he speaks.
okay. So, that being said, the state of Georgia evidently is already mandating that fire departments purchase and maintain certain insurance coverages for firefighters, line 3 of the bill.
For injuries.
For injury, and my question is, what is the mandated coverages that the state of Georgia is requiring for our firefighting community right now?
In some of these firefighters,
There's not a dollar amount on it.
it's workers' comp is my understanding.
It's just
if you-
workers' comp.
If you get burned in a fire or something like that, where your injury,
So it's just the product, workers' compensation. There's no other health insurance. There's no other any other kind of insurance product. It's just mandating workers' compensation coverage. That answers my question. Thank you.
Is that it, Bruce?
yeah.
Okay,
16 through
number 3. You're on.
Chairman. And I'd also like to thank the author for all his hard work on this. I had the pleasure of working with him last year on the work comp bill, and he has worked awfully hard and put he's certainly become an expert on this issue. But I just had a couple of quick questions. And I've seen policies similar to this in my business. I mean, we've had situation before in the neighboring county where a firefighter really got hurt really bad, and then there was obviously some deficiencies on the way his family was taken care of, and we were able to go out in the marketplace and find a carrier that offers a policy geared towards first responders. It was more of an accident type policy. Went back to the municipality and they agreed to pay for that coverage for all the volunteer firefighters. So a lot of my counties are very rural and have 100% volunteer firefighters protecting the county, and these are some amazing people that are just amazing how dedicated they are. So that kind of brings up my question that was spurred by what Representative Hughley asked, like as far as the differences in the coverage. So if you've got a small county, you know, that's 4,000 people, limited budgets, well, you're going to have all volunteer firemen, so those firemen are subject to this $1,500 a month benefit rather than the 60% of their monthly salary. So that carrier would have the ability to lower their rates in the case that that's all the benefits are going to be payable is at the $1,500 level max. Wouldn't that be the case?
It is, and they're, let me speak to the $1,500 and why it's different than the full-time actives. I anticipated a certain complexity in determining a volunteer firefighter's actual salary, since they're not receiving compensation for the work that they do for the county or for the city. So it actually proved to be easier to pay them a defined amount, regardless of what they were earning in other spots. The other piece you mentioned, and I'll speak to, is you're absolutely right. We'll find examples of different counties and different municipalities that offer some benefit. Predominantly, you see a lot of voluntary benefits, right? They offer benefits to the firefighters that the firefighters can purchase and pay for, but it's less rare. It's less frequent that you see sort of an employer pay or municipality paid benefit or city paid benefit that way.
Yeah, that makes sense too, and that brings up another question though, as far as like, would there be, I mean, the carriers would still be able to, as long as they meet the minimum requirements under the law, whatever we decide to do, then they would still be able to offer that fireman when they're sitting down with them and say, look, this is what the base is, but if you want to increase that $25,000 per first occurrence benefit to $35,000, you can do that for this cost. Wouldn't that be?
Yeah, conceptually, you could do something like that. I haven't gotten to the point of buying up or different. We have had discussions about offering other types of products within the sort of the firefighters program, but those would be on a voluntary basis, and would there be some sort of enrollment process to it as well.
And then one of the other differences between this and other like major medical insurance or workers' comp is these benefits would be paid directly to the firefighter, correct?
Correct. And think of, to that point, think of these products, and this has come up a couple of times. This is really designed to fill certain gaps, right? So the supplemental medical is designed to provide benefits for things like COBRA, things like the deductibles and copays. The disability benefit is designed it really kicks in at 6 months, because in polling the firefighters, a fairly high percentage had short-term disability, but had not elected long-term disability. So the idea would be the preponderance had some coverage that would carry them 6 months, but that's on the 6 month, this benefit covering that gap of 3 years, and I'll explain the 3 years in a second here, but that would start where short-term disability ended. The 3-year duration is designed, initially we started at 2 years, but a number of firefighters made a good point that it takes, if they were moving, let's say, into Social Security disability, that could easily be a year's process. So it was better to add an additional year where the firefighter had been applying but still receiving benefits through this program, and then ceasing when they were moving on to Social Security disability.
Yeah, okay. And so on the major medical side, though, if that firefighter also had major medical health insurance provided by their employer or their spouse, wherever they're getting it, or if they're a volunteer and they're having to get it somewhere else,
right,
then this benefit would be paid in addition to that to help cover their out-of-pocket and their additional living expenses.
Right, and the idea would be to provide very strong guidance as to what to do with that lump sum benefit. In other words, that's not a benefit to pay off the house, to pay off the truck. We could take a good opportunity to provide guidance in terms of, okay, that money is designed to cover you for a period of time. You're going to be going through treatment, chemotherapy, you won't be working. So let's make sure that you take these steps in managing that fund of money. As you look at a lot of the firefighter websites nationally provide great guidance about financial planning, what to do when you have cancer. And my idea, as we thought about it, was to wrap the program back around through some of these assistance programs that a lot of the Georgia firefighters already know about, and to be certain that we're crossing over with as much value as we possibly can.
All right, one final question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So when you started out, you were talking about basically you were referencing two different types of policies. So you're basically talking cancer insurance and then accident disability. But you're going to be able to, these carriers will design this into one policy, correct? That'll basically cover all these different things and geared towards these firefighters, correct?
Not exactly one policy, but it will be managed as one policy because they are separate in their filings in the state of Georgia. They're separately filed. I started originally with critical illness, which covers a very broad array. Guidance from the firefighters is to narrow that directly to cancer. So I took a chassis that is just a lump sum chassis, which normally pays for a lot of benefits, and defined it directly towards cancer at those tiers of severity. That does not coordinate with medical benefits. So that's $25,000 or 25% of that number, depending on severity. The disability started out initially, and I looked at a number of disability models, but very quickly came to a model that I thought, having worked in disability for a long time, is a very easy model to access and to understand, right? And the definition of disability, and it varies a little bit from carriers that we're looking at, is really an inability of a firefighter to do his or her job, right? It's not tied to earnings losses or anything like that. It's that is the definition that we should have.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to call on Mr. Cal Ray. If you'd come to the podium, please.
Yes, sir.
Because we're in the process of thinking about this and captives. Could you go over that with us?
Well, we had a discussion about how do you finance this, or what is the structure, and one of the things that we had kicked around was a captive. GMA has formed a captive. The captive really represents our property and liability and our workers' comp fund. To provide this through our captive, we would have to do some changes to that captive, but that's one thing under consideration, and we're looking at that as an option. Cities.
Could you go over how that operates a little bit for those of us who are not in insurance?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, this is Cal Ray, who's our Deputy Director of Georgia Municipal Association, and he runs the employee benefits for us.
Okay.
What we did is we structured a captive so it would take some of the risk off of the underlying work comp fund and property liability fund that we provide to cities. And it's a vehicle that allows us, with some changes, to do some of these kind of things, to pick up coverage, such as what we're talking about now. And, in the future, if this is we're looking at it as a fully insured product, but in the future, it may make sense for us to assume some of the risk on behalf of the cities in terms of providing this benefit.
Okay, number 29, or have you already? Okay.
I had a previous question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
Brad Raffensperger, 50th District. On line 19, you get of months. And my question, the bill that you had last year was 5 years. Is that what I heard? Well, but now it's 12 months, and why was that time period picked?
I'm sorry.
On line
Representative
19,
Raffensperger.
on 12 consecutive for eligibility?
Yeah, there wasn't a requirement in
Okay.
House Bill 216 last year.
And this year, then, you picked 12 months. Why was that picked as opposed to 18 or 24?
I'm going to defer to those that picked it.
We didn't pick it either, but I don't know.
Or however it was picked, those that know.
What we were looking at was to have the coverage effective immediately, but if there was a cancer claim within 6 months of employment, that the insurance carriers would want to look back 3 months prior to the employment or the effective date of this insurance platform to check to see whether or not treatment wasn't sought or a diagnosis wasn't made ahead of time prior to coming on board with the coverage, just to avoid the possibility of someone trying to game the system by getting a diagnosis, going through the training, becoming a firefighter, and then trying to get the benefit after the fact. So that's how the insurance carriers worked. I think the 12-month, the intention of it was to try to weed out that potential gaming of the system, but it may have come from legislative council or something like that. I don't quite know.
Just to follow up on that, legislation in other states, now I understand what you're asking, does have a employment term that has to be triggered. That we've seen that in just about all of the legislative measures that have come forward. A term that has to be consecutive employment that has to be met before the firefighter is eligible to receive a benefit.
And this product could actually, on the benefit side, could accomplish the same thing. So, for example, if you wanted volunteer firefighters to serve, say, 5 years, 2 years, 3 years of work before being eligible for the benefits, we certainly could do that.
Okay, number one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I definitely don't think it's right for firemen to have a burden of proof. And I've been sitting here trying to take off being a legislator and take off the insurance company and go back to being a business owner. And in a business, we were self-insured for workers' comp and health for 3 years. And I say the GMA, the municipality is the business, and it's owned by the citizens. By covering firefighters, we've said this is a disability plan. By covering the firefighters and not covering all city employees, are we implying, in the case of a death, that this was their death was firefighter related? And does that open up some can of worms for the cities and so forth? Would it go back on comp? That bothers me that look, and I'm just thinking from a business standpoint. This is not pro or anti firefighter. These things are hard for me to say because I love the fire department, but it's just a fact. When you cover the fire department with this disability and not all employees, are you implying that their illness or their death was in fact due to their job? By giving it to all employees, it costs a lot more. But the repercussions down the road from this thing, I think, are huge. And I guess that's a question from a business owner standpoint.
So when we first started working on this product, working with John, we were looking at providing this to all employees as a benefit of their employment. In discussions with the firefighters and the insurance carriers, the thought was it's the firefighters that have that unique situation of running towards burning buildings, et cetera. So in discussions with them, we narrowed it down to just firefighters and just for cancer. But from a risk management standpoint, we started out with critical illnesses and all employees, trying to figure out a way to have that pool large enough to where it would be a manageable risk that keeps costs down.
My only thought would be a cancer disability policy for everybody. And I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business, but I don't see how you're not going to imply that any cancer a firefighter gets was caused by his job. And at the time of a death, what his family is going to say, why don't you give them disability insurance, or why would they need this if all employees would if it's not caused from the job? That's just a point that I want to be made of.
Thank you.
Okay. 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gravely, you mentioned earlier that 38 states have dealt with this situation. Do you know if, or any of the others on the panel, how many of the, or if any states have taken an approach similar to this of purchasing insurance as opposed to dealing with it through a workers' comp situation?
I believe, and I could be incorrect on this, I believe we're the first state that's taken this approach.
Okay. All right.
the state of Arizona has is the only other state that I know of, and it's a different plan. It's a cancer reimbursement style plan, so it's a very broad, just single cancer plan. It's voluntary. It has a couple of different payment levers. So I would say it's different than what we're talking about here.
Right.
But that's the only thing I've seen. What you do see when you go to the marketplace or you go to different states is you see a lot of voluntary products. So
Right.
they're solving, to the extent that they're making the products available, that's their solution to on the benefit side of it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, number 18.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here and answering these questions. And Kyle, I'm trying to get my head around this. It appears what you just said, that we've got a lot of voluntary products out here that, if were made available, or if maybe the firefighters took advantage of them, they might solve a lot of this need. From what I'm hearing, my understanding is that we're trying to create a company or a policy that someone will sell directly to the firefighters, which is going to be, it's going to be a finite number of folks pretty much. Is that what we're looking at doing, creating a policy for them?
We are looking at creating a policy, but not selling a policy to them. This would be a policy that is funded by a municipality or a county. So the firefighter, there's a need to demonstrate eligibility, right? And we'll have language in the contract that would do that. But it isn't a move to the
market.
firefighter to have them sign off and pay for the benefit.
Okay. Well, okay. Second question. I got a couple, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. It sounds like the disability portion, after 6 months, we're going to pay them up to 3.5 years of disability here. That's sort of like the short-term disability they have now. Is that correct?
In a way, it is. It pays in a sort of similar fashion. Think of it as like two sides of a coin. Short-term disability has a higher incidence, so the likelihood of paying is much higher in the first 6 months.
Right.
This product really is designed, when you think of it, remember, simplicity is the guiding principle, but
Just
also
cancer.
very predictable, right? I know what it is I'm going to get. I know when I get it. If I have to talk to the insurance company or to someone, I know I can do that, but very predictable sequence over the course of 36 months.
If a firefighter has purchased the short-term coverage through his cafeteria plan, will we have duplicate payments here? The municipality will be paying one policy and he'll be paying for another for short-term?
Yeah, in that situation, he would be, if he's funding the short term, this would only fund the 3-year plan.
3.5 years. If he elected long-term, if he elected a long-term plan through his cafeteria availability,
Right.
could that still kick in afterwards?
So we've gone through these discussions. So the disability portion does coordinate with other sources of income. At the end of the day, they would still receive 60%.
Okay.
But
So there is coordination of benefits.
Right, and that's a filed disability provision for any disability carrier. And think of the benefits, any other sources of external income from other businesses, if they're receiving a pension benefit as disability, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And just for clarification, Chairman Maxwell, that's what the carriers have been working with us on, but that's one of the flaws of House Bill 146 is it doesn't take into account other benefits like a long-term disability and how it meshes with
Okay.
the benefits that would be prescribed in this. So that's one of the things that we'd have to sort of iron out as this legislation moves forward. And just when you mentioned the voluntary plans, just to call to your attention, there is some discussion that's going around. Section 2 in the bill basically contemplates a income tax exemption for any income replacement that a firefighter would get. But there is discussion about the possibility of allowing a 100% tax credit, income tax credit for firefighters that do purchase those types of policies. That's just something, it's not in this bill, but it is another way to try to help get firefighters to have coverage that they need in case they were to develop cancer. So
Well, that's sort of where I'm getting to. We've got plans available out here. I know there's a lot of people that market cafeteria plans, short-term disability, long-term disability, cancer plans already. I'm just trying to think, we're trying to in my little mind, trying to reinvent the wheel here on something that's already available in a lot of instances. Now, I don't know about the big payouts where we get the $25,000 up front. That is probably not available in most plans that I know of, or maybe in a lot. I don't know of that. Are they available, that large plan? And what's on the market now?
Well, they would choose, potentially you could, as a critical illness plan, choose a $10,000, $20,000 benefit. Usually there's a choice. You can choose one or the other.
Okay.
I think the distinction here, and you're right, there are all sorts of ways to buy insurance these days. Unfortunately, there are too many ways to buy insurance.
Right, it gets confusing.
Right, and one of the, and again, the guidance from the firefighters was, I asked literally days of questions until they were tired of listening to me, but I asked a lot of them if they purchased insurance, what did they have, do they know, what do their colleagues purchase, and it wouldn't surprise you, they're a sturdy lot. They don't buy insurance because in many ways they don't feel as though, they feel that somehow there's another way to do it, or they're just so tough that they don't need to buy insurance. So there are ways to sell this on the voluntary market. It's that specifically we were looking at a benefit, at least at this stage, at a benefit that would be, as I'd mentioned before, that is where the cost is borne by the municipality and the county, and it's established, so it's defined. The firefighter knows precisely what it is. They don't have to go to an insurance market to find that coverage, which sometimes is medically underwritten or more expensive than what this benefit might be.
So if I were to go out and sign up for a fire department in some municipality, I would automatically have this coverage?
That's to be determined, because as we were speaking earlier, we may potentially have waiting periods, so you may have to wait a year.
Right, but I mean, if I'm an employee, a firefighter at some point in time, if I stayed the year, 12 months, 24 months, whatever it is, that's automatically going to be provided for me under the plan we're looking at.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, 2 more questions. 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would be for the GMA representative. From a legal or a constitutional standpoint, whichever way you want to call it, how are you going to justify making this available just for the fire department and, as previously asked, other city employees or county employees, but particularly you then said those who run towards the danger? Well, police officers, emergency management people, all EMTs, all first responders, they all run towards the danger as well. And I'm just wondering how you're going to reconcile not offering it for all and not having a constitutional or legal problem with those employees with some type of action against the city or even the state, because we're mandating it, I guess is my question.
Yeah, and so you do raise a good point. There are, in many pension systems, different levels of benefits, system benefits for different professions. You can retire at earlier ages in some pension systems. If you're a policeman, same with firefighters, there's different levels of benefits, so that they are treated differently than other municipal employees from a pension context. And the policy reason, of course, is because it's very hard. It's a demanding job to be a firefighter, and so there's a policy reason why you want them to be able to retire earlier than a city clerk, for instance. But we can review those legal concerns that you've raised and see if we can make sure that we are making sure that we're not afoul of any constitutional disparity of treatment.
I just see you running into a big legal problem with treating everybody fair, but particularly if you just want to qualify it to those who run towards the danger.
Right.
You've got another whole set of people who run towards the danger, and I just see it as a real problem in this legislation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, to that point, one thing we need to be mindful of legally is from a language perspective, if a firefighter is killed in the line of duty, that triggers a $150,000 benefit from the state of Georgia. It also possibly triggers a $300,000 benefit, and that varies at the federal level. And if a benefit package specifically states line of duty, to your point, Mr. Tarvin's point, it also can trigger some other things as well.
But this wasn't a triggering mechanism. This is a mandate.
So, yeah, it would
just
be a
because you're an
mandated
employee.
Exactly.
Period. Now, that's That
Yes,
was
sir.
my question. I'm not against it, I'm just.
Yes, sir. No,
But that's a real problem as I see it from where I've seen during my lifetime.
And that's exactly, I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the reason we need to hear every angle of this particular discussion, the potential problems it could present, how we're going to get around those particular problems as well.
Number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick clarifying question. Lines 44 through 46, it talks about the Training Council and their role in possibly helping assist counties and municipalities in purchasing this insurance. Can you speak a little bit more to what that assistance means? Is that financial? Is that administrative? What is the role of the Training Council in this matter?
That's a very good question. Lines 44, it starts on 47. Georgia Firefighter Standards and Training Council shall be authorized to adopt such rules and regulations as reasonably and necessary to implement provisions of this code section to establish and modify minimum requirements, provided such, obviously, departments operating the state. Is that the section you were talking about there? Or on 44?
44 through 52
Okay, subject to
is great.
appropriations. That initially provided a mechanism that would unlock potentially the state to appropriate. However, you run into a constitutional problem from the standpoint of the state gratuities. I mean, from the Gratuities Act, the state cannot just give people money. So that was already one of the provisions that we're going to have to reevaluate. But that was a mechanism in order for the state to potentially have skin in the game, quite frankly.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, number 5, last question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank y'all for your work. I know y'all worked hard
Yes,
on
sir.
it. I think we've got a lot more work to do on it, looks like, from the sound of things. And I just kind of want to wrap up and follow up on a couple of questions I've heard. We had 38 states that have addressed this in one fashion or another. And I guess I heard that the only one that's followed this model that we know of is Arizona. Is that? Okay, similar model to that. And because that was something I've been thinking throughout this hearing, and to the very good point that Representative Caldwell made, I too have some concerns in that regard, and I was wondering if that state of Arizona has, I think we need to look to see if what they've, there's nothing wrong with, being a pioneer, but sometimes they get arrows in the back. So we need to find out if they've, had any similar issues and problems there. The other one is, did I also hear correctly that, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. That this approach would actually be more cost effective by not IDing the specific cancers that are more inherent in this line of work and just having a blanket statement of cancer. Is that, or blanket, I guess, policy of cancer? Is that correct?
It's more of a product design issue
Yeah.
than it is.
I think you said implementation was a lot more effective that way, but
Right, and it's, this gets to the point of choosing a product that we know is widely available or available in the marketplace. The policies that we've looked at do identify certain types of cancer that aren't covered. It just isn't as specific as presumptive legislation that says these are the 7 cancers specifically that are covered under the presumption.
Mhm.
It limits it more, again, to my point about severity than it does on types.
okay. And then looking at the bill, and I assume it's somewhere in the code now, but where was it? Line 13, it says a fire department shall purchase insurance and maintain it. I'm sure that we all do and everybody does. But is there, if something like this were to pass and that stays the same, is there something already in the code that addresses if they don't? Because, say this policy may be very expensive and cost prohibitive for one of these, smaller departments that we've talked about, and they just don't do it. And is there a mechanism already built, addressed in the law where there's a recourse, or do we have to wait till they get sued by somebody to purchase it?
So the way that Legislative Council crafted this is it's in Title 25, which is the fire safety title.
Mhm.
And and it's basically a requirement for what your fire department has to meet in order to be a legitimate fire department, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so, so to your question, it would place cities and counties in a position of saying, do we want to basically not have a fire department that's certified as a fire department? And then how does that affect ISO ratings and economic development? It would potentially be devastating.
So it's a qualifier for certification.
It's a
okay.
right.
All
It's a backdoor way to try to, as a condition of what your certification for a fire department is. It's a backdoor way of trying to address that benefit.
Yeah.
mandate.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we've got 3 people who want to comment on the legislation. Mr. Bill Clark, if y'all can keep your comments to, say, less than 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be very brief. My name is Bill Clark. I represent the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, including over 400 lawyers here in Georgia who represent injured workers, including firefighters. One of the great frustrations our members have had over recent years is the number of firefighters who've come to them and said, I've gotten cancer because I fight fire for my job. Can you file my workers' compensation claim for me? And over and over and over, our members have had to explain to them that there is an absolute bar to disease coverage in the Workers' Compensation Act if it is what is known as an ordinary disease of life, such as cancer. And so we've been working quietly, but everywhere we can to try to help this legislation, its predecessor, move forward to remove that bar, to enable our firefighters to file workers' compensation claims. This issue, again, I'll get in line with everybody else commending GMA. They really have put their money where their mouth is. They want to step up and help their firefighters, and they've come up with a different mousetrap. And I'll tell you, my lawyers would love for the workers' comp bill to pass because they get paid fighting workers' comp cases on behalf of injured workers. They won't be involved in this at all. And therein lies the beauty of this legislation. It does not require litigation. A firefighter does not have to go hire a lawyer to fight their employer, the city or the county for whom they've worked and oftentimes given their good health and life even. So there's no litigation, no requirement to prove a causal connection. We worked on 216 last year to steal the same language that's in the Workers' Comp Act now for heart attack cases. Heart attack cases are incredibly difficult for a worker to prevail on because there's so many things that cause heart attacks. Well, there's so many things that cause cancer. These cases would be extremely difficult to win even if Representative Gravely's bill from last year, 216, or this year's 152 were to become law. Extremely difficult for the firefighter to prevail on. I don't make any judgments on the level of benefits that this bill passes. That's beyond my understanding. I don't understand all the back and forth all of you in the insurance industry have talked about today, but I do know to provide our firefighters who they really do. They're the ones that give their lives and their health when we all flee. Shouldn't their work-related condition be something that they would have coverage for? I think this is a compelling piece of legislation, and I just think that you've got an opportunity to help, and the payor is trying to help. The GMA, the cities are trying to help, and I hope ACCG joins them to help in the effort. And I just commend the legislation to you. And I know there's a lot of insurance work that's left to be done on this bill, and there are great insurance minds in this committee. And I hope y'all will work with Representative Gravely to address this stark need, this need that we as a society and as a state ought to step up and meet, and that is to take care of our firefighters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to answer any questions if there are any. Otherwise, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
I don't see any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dennis Thayer.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you for allowing me a chance to speak. My name is Mayor Dennis Thayer. I am a professional firefighter of about 32 years here in the state of Georgia. I am also the chairman of the Georgia Fallen Firefighters Foundation, the chairman of the Georgia Firefighters Cancer Coalition, And today I also have been given the opportunity and the entrust to represent the Georgia State Firefighters Association, the Georgia State Fire Chiefs. I've been one of those working on this committee to come up with the language we got, and we have today. Perfect English there, we got. But the fire service, of course, feels this is a work-related issue. Not every cancer, not every scenario, absolutely, and we agree to that, and we submit to that. The evidence and the research is phenomenal out there, and I'm not going to spend time going over that, but we've proven, I think we did a good job last year of proving that fire service does cause cancer. And let me clarify why. It's not the fact that we're running towards the danger. It's the fact that we're going in that burning building exposed to unknown carcinogens, unknown circumstances. Police officers are not running in those buildings. EMTs are not running in those buildings. EMA folks ain't running in those buildings. Firefighters are running in those buildings. They're being exposed at extremely high temperatures to extremely bad things. It's a synthetic world. This problem was not a problem when I started in the fire service. My career is sunsetting. This legislation is not for me. This is for those that are coming up behind us, the next generation, that are being exposed to all the plastics when they burn. This is the issue. It's not a breathing issue. We have great, very expensive breathing equipment. It keeps us from breathing. It's being absorbed through the skin. The fire service, the world's fire service is working diligently to design new types of gear, new types of equipment to try to cut down on the exposure. But until that happens, unless we stop running in buildings, the exposure is going to be there. And we're working hard to figure that out. I would also like to clarify something Mr. Hanson said. Firefighters don't believe that they're invincible. I have many insurance policies. Aflac gets a lot of my money every month. All right? 70% of this state's fire service is volunteer. So you got folks that are going to leave their job, leave their family, and not get paid a dime to go save somebody else's life or to go help their neighbor. And then we expect them to pay for insurance on top of that if something happens to them? That's not right. Why? This is an employment issue. We obviously feel this should be a workman's comp issue. But the fire service is willing to compromise and work on a policy. We've worked on this. We left Friday feeling that we've come to a pretty good place. Now, our main concern is that we don't pay for this out of pocket in the end. Because then we've done nothing more than created another supplemental cancer policy. And that's what this needs not to be. This is a work-related issue. Not every time, not every person, but it is work-related. We're trying to help those guys and gals who are 25, 35 years old, have a family. They get work-related cancer. They can't work. Fire service, unlike a lot of occupations, if you're sick, you can't work. None of you want them to work if they're sick. You want them to be at their best. And they lose their job because it can only carry them so long. We understand that. We're trying to help those folks keep their medical insurance and not lose everything else they have because now they've lost their job because they got cancer that we can pretty securely say it came from work. That's what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Before we had to wear Scott air packs, I've gone in a home and we didn't have one on, and I've reached in a baby bed after the neighbors said they left their child at home and found a doll, so you can imagine. My question, I guess, is Scott air packs, I guess it's something better now. Does Georgia require that all firefighters wear Scott air packs when they're in a burning home or building or?
Oh, absolutely. All of standard practices in all of the country is that way. And I mean, there are times where I'm sure somebody without the equipment will go in, but
Yeah.
I mean, standard practices.
There's nobody loves a firefighter more than I do, but I've got to play the devil's advocate. Can you, and this is a terrible thing to say, but can you, with a Scott air pack on, you couldn't get lung cancer through your skin, could you?
And that's not, well, I can't say you can't, and that's not the kind of cancers we're seeing. We're seeing
Okay.
testicular
Skin.
cancer, prostate cancer, esophageal cancer, throat cancer, because of your body, the places in your body
We're
that start to
exposed.
heat up, that absorb the carcinogens. That's what we're seeing. Brain cancers, throat cancers.
Okay.
We're not seeing lung cancers. That's not the issue. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Clint Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Clint Mueller. I'm the Legislative Director for the County Commissioners Association. We've been working with the author of this legislation. We appreciate Representative Gravely for working with us. Also been working with the various firefighter organizations and the Georgia Municipal Association. I feel like we're making progress. I think our membership feels like there's some benefit in looking outside of the workman's comp system to provide a benefit to the firefighters. And we appreciate you giving us time to continue to try to craft what that would look like. Obviously, there's things that aren't in the current version that we would feel like need to be addressed in a future version. I don't want to get into all those details today because I think we're working through all those issues. We plan to give the author sort of a list of our issues that we'd like to see addressed to the legislation. Again, it's really comes down to what's the best protection for the firefighter at the lowest cost for the taxpayers. We feel like that this supplemental type of policy would provide more benefit, especially immediately. Again, we've heard today about the difficulty in sometimes litigating and how long that can take. And when firefighters have this terrible disease, that's the last thing they want to be caught up in, is having to litigate and possibly not even reaching a settlement before, in the near future. They need the help immediately. This would provide them the help immediately without having to jump through lots of hoops and hurdles. So we think it's the right approach. Again, I understand the concerns that have been raised about what about other employees in the counties and cities. Again, I think we have to remind everybody that this is being looked at as an alternative to the workman's comp. I think everybody agreed last year that they ought to have access to any kind of workman's comp coverage. This would be, again, an alternative to that. Instead of having to go through that workman's comp system and litigate that. But if you all have any questions, I'd be glad to answer any questions. Otherwise,
I don't see any. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Representative Gravely, you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I would be remiss if I didn't say this. There was a gentleman here last year by the name of Frank Martinez who worked with Squad 4 with the Atlanta Fire Department. A lot of my family members worked with Frank, and some of Frank's colleagues are in the room today. Frank stood in our halls, having been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. He advocated for the bill. He gave great information and educated a lot of us on what firefighter cancer was, how they were exposed to it, and the different chemicals and carcinogens. It was an uncontrolled environment that they went into. In December, just 2 years after Frank's diagnosis, I joined about 5,000 other firefighters from across the state as we buried Frank. From diagnosis to death was about 2 years. Frank's doctors were almost certain that they could have shown Frank's cancer was from fighting fire. Frank was my age. I'm not the specimen of health, but Frank was. And to see his family, 2 young kids, Frank and his brothers and sisters in the Atlanta Fire Department, when Frank couldn't work anymore and had exhausted all of his sick leave, there were folks that were spending their time covering Frank's shift until that was deemed that his colleagues were unable to do that anymore. But I just wanted to mention that I think it was just a point of honor to mention Frank Martinez because he was advocating last year for firefighters across this state. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention him and the work that he did and the fact that he's no longer with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. This is a very important issue. We will have probably a substitute Wednesday morning. We've got some issues that were brought up during the discussion today, but like I said, it is a very important issue, and we will have a vote on this particular piece of legislation. So I would encourage everyone to be here, especially Wednesday morning, because you may have an opportunity. I think we got some ideas on how we're gonna clean this thing up, and we'll give you a chance. Thank you, sir. Y'all have a good day, and we'll see you Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock.